On today's show, you'll discover 3 essential strategies to make your team more resilient. So stay tuned. Welcome back to my show where high achievers get productive, get promoted, and get the corner office. Make sure to like and subscribe because every Wednesday I release a new episode that will help you accelerate your career. So today we're talking about 3 essential strategies to help your team become more resilient. Resilience is defined as your ability to recover from a challenge. And Lord knows there are plenty of challenges to recover from in life and organizations. Definitely during a global pandemic, all these situations can combine and compound to make smaller challenges become bigger. So resilience in yourself and your team becomes a competitive advantage. It can make work a more enjoyable place to be. And also over the long haul, it makes you and your team more successful because you're able to adapt and become more flexible and stay focused and productive even when the greatest of challenges hit. But unfortunately for so many leaders, when challenges come, morale takes a hit, productivity takes a hit, and ultimately results take a hit. But it doesn't have to be that way. In fact, instill a little more resilience in your team today after watching this video and notice how this can impact your results in a positive way. Essential strategy number 1 to make your team more resilient is to push decisions down where they need to be made. A client of mine recently was really struggling with the resilience side of the equation, and they've got quite a habit of making all the decisions. In fact, he's a pretty big team, and the team would, instead of making a big decision for themselves, they always roll these decisions up to the top part of the organization. This happens a lot in military environments, or decisions get made at higher levels and get pushed down to lower levels and then executed at that level. And this can deliver results. However, this isn't a great resilience-based strategy because in times of crisis, there are too many decisions to be made and they need to be made very quickly and then bubbling these things up takes more time and more effort and really can stress out the top leadership. In fact, there were over 20 listed on this list. The key here from a resilience-based perspective is to make sure that you're pushing these decisions down to the levels where people are closer to the action, they're closer to what's going on, and they can make them much more quickly. So as a leader, right now, list out those decisions that you need to be making on a critical timetable. And then next piece of that, if you do that, which ones can be delegated? But what it allowed him to do was to actually reduce the list in about half. And he was able to reduce his focus. He delegated the others, and then he actually was able to address these, and he was able to allocate more quality time to decisions that he needed to make. It turns out a crisis is a great time to start delegating because, again, you need to prioritize those really high important decisions. The other part of this, though, is maybe saying, well, Ben, if I'm used to making all the decisions, and I don't feel comfortable or I don't trust my team to actually make the decisions themselves because they're not used to this. And now you're telling me in a crisis that I need to let them start making more decisions? I need to start delegating more in a crisis to boost my delegation skills at this time? The answer is yes, but it depends. If you don't really trust certain individuals yet to make the entire decision, ask them to propose the decision to you versus bringing you the question. Ask them to propose, and that will shortcut your time immensely. And then you can go yes, no, or maybe, and then make adjustments. That alone will help begin to train them, and you'll begin to trust them more to understand your mindset, how you're aligning to decisions. Number 2 in ability or resistance is to reestablish team commitment. So many times, leaders go about their day just assuming that the team is committed to the results, although maybe they never really asked for their commitment to the team results, or maybe they did it but like a year ago. And in a crisis, it's a great opportunity to ask for their commitment. And yes, maybe they should be committed, but they're human beings and they get distracted with other things. They may not really even understand what they're committed to anymore. And a committed team is a resilient team. That's right, I'll repeat that. A committed team is a resilient team. It's an ideal scenario where you establish an all hands on deck mentality for accomplishing the main goal, and that alone can boost your resilience. So let's talk about how you do that. The first thing is to share what they're committed to or what you would like them to be committed to, whether it's hitting this big goal, whether it's delivering on promises that you made to other organizations, other teams inside your company. Ask for their commitment to that. And the second part of that is show them or tell them what commitment looks like, where they're showing up on time, they're going for these goals, they're meeting all the key milestones and deadlines. And the third part is just ask for their commitment. You might be surprised. Maybe they could be committed if you made a few changes to the resources that you were providing, or maybe they're not committed anymore, and you need to start thinking about how you can change or modify the team. But here's the really interesting part is you might have forgotten what you guys committed to in the first place. You might have forgotten that. Paint the picture clearly. Give them a clear target. Imagine a bow and arrow, right? Where they are going to shoot for the target and you're going to bring that target, make it so close to their face that they can't miss it. Make it clear, ask for their commitment, and move forward. Now I'm about to give you tip number 3, but before I give you tip number 3, make sure that you keep watching right after the tip, because I'm going to give you some really interesting ways to apply this big tip to your team, to your organization, and even yourself. Tip number 3 is to increase candor. That's right, drop the mic. Candor is the skill of having direct, open, sincere communication. You might be saying, Ben, how in the world does this increase my resilience and my team's resilience? Well, it turns out it makes a big deal, because when your team is able to have candor with you and each other, they have trust, they communicate more effectively, they give better feedback, and the organization can take more quick steps and be more strategic about getting to the big picture in an innovative and a creative way, which, by the way, creativity, innovation, these are things that are essential in a crisis. So build your team's resilience by instilling this important yet fairly simple yet sometimes hard to implement skill. So author Keith Ferrazzi, who I've mentioned in a few of these other videos, he and his team did some interesting research with banks right after the 2008 financial crisis. And he's had some interesting results regarding candor. Teams that scored the lowest on candor saw the poorest financial returns among those banks during the global economic crisis. In contrast, groups that communicate candidly about risky securities, lending practices, and other potential problems were able to preserve shareholder wealth. Those that were able to communicate more directly, they had much better results. If you think about it, this is completely logical, and this makes an awful lot of sense. More direct communication, more being very sensitive and indirect about what you're saying, and being direct. Keith talks about this as caring criticism. So what you do is, before you make your statement, you're thinking about how it's going to be received, and you try to couch it in a caring way. Now, how do you execute this? Think about this, or I would like to suggest, or I might suggest. These 3 phrases, you might be saying, Ben, that doesn't sound very direct. Well, what follows that actually is pretty direct, but it softens the blow through Keith's caring criticism method. So when you're giving feedback to somebody during a difficult situation, say, think about this. Why don't you talk to your customers before you roll out that big product right now so quickly? Why don't you get your suppliers involved before you start stretching the supply chain in this kind of way? Or before you take this critical step, think about this. Why don't you sit on it for 24 hours before taking action? Those are some really simple ways to enact this. I just love it because it helps you become more candid, but it also helps you couch it in a caring yet critical way. One of the key insights from the author of Radical Candor in this New York Times best-selling book is actually pretty surprising. Before you're going to give radical candor, radical feedback to someone, why not listen with the intent to understand fully without trying to reply at all? Because so many times when we're thinking about giving feedback, we're thinking about our response while they're talking. And then oftentimes what comes out of our mouth isn't fully formulated or fully couched in a way that's going to be heard by the recipient, which, by the way, is the whole point of candor. The key is to sit there and listen openly before you formulate your response. And notice how the quality of what you hear and the quality of your responses are even better. And I'm really excited to tell you about this, because there's a great organization that I work with, and they are in the apparel business, and they got a double hit during COVID. Number one, COVID was hitting Asia, hitting a lot of their factories. And so that created supply chain disruption there, as you would imagine. Then months passed, and then COVID hit in the US. So it was a double whammy. It hit there, it hit here, in the supply chain. However, what they decided to do with some of my help is they took a step back from the process and they looked at how they were handling things, and they were able to take a different approach, applying some of these tips, and set their organization on a much more resilient path forward. Turns out they were getting results, but they were burning people out, and they thought they were on the verge of potentially losing some key employees. They made these changes, people stayed, and the resilience of the organization got better. So the way it worked out was, instead of the CEO, the president, making all the big decisions in this difficult situation, he began to push down the decisions to the front line. And yes, several were bubbled up to him anyway, but they often came with a suggested solution or proposal for action forward, and that allowed them to respond better and more quickly and just got more people involved. The second one was, the organization previously was fairly siloed, where you had the supply chain, finance, marketing, sales, all kind of working independently, and he was sort of orchestrating from the top. Instead, he began to get their commitment to work together, definitely allow them to work more closely and more effectively than they ever have before. And then what he started to see was radical candor, right? Some Kim Scott stuff, some Keith Ferrazzi strategies all coming together to help them move forward in a productive way, where they were communicating much more effectively. They weren't commuting as much, by the way, because they were working more from home, which also complicated things a good bit. But having that direct candor with each other and bringing the problems out and then talking about solutions and charting a path forward ultimately helped them become more successful and really increase their resilience for the next challenge that they face. So I covered 3 essential strategies to help your team become more resilient. If you really want to take your team's resilience to the next level, make sure to stick around, because in the next video, I'm going to cover even more, and it will accelerate your team's resilience and ultimately help you become more productive as a team and get more done.